Hi, welcome to the Dark World. Today we are introducing an aquatic animal that living in the biggest oceans of Nardo, the Pacific Ocean. The name of this animal is called Varnary. Today we have Luna, Doris, Brooke, Leo, and Tameka to introduce Varnary. So, Varnary have an adorable appearance with a combination of dolphin heads, seal body, shark nose, and gills, and they have specific functions respectively. Dolphin heads has echolocation function, seal body has blubber to maintain thermal regulation, shark nose is able to detect wounded fish, and shark gills is to obtain oxygen gas. In the Pacific Ocean, different aquatic animal species are living in different zones, including the upper layer, dark euphotic, the middle layer, dark dysphotic, and the lowest layer, dark aphotic. These three different zones have no connections with temperature since there is no sunlight absorption in this whole planet. And therefore, blubber plays an important role of it. It maintains the temperatures of the bodies in between 36.5 to 37.5 Celsius degree. So, three different zones of oceans are divided by the amount of oxygen gas. The uppermost layer has the most concentrated oxygen gas, and therefore, wild variety of aquatic species are living in there. Varnary is one of them. And Varnary is living in the dark euphotic zone in order to obtain enough oxygen to maintain the regular functions of respiratory systems, and also it is convenient for them to prey on. There is no plant in this whole planet because no photosynthesis will be able to occur. As a result, aquatic animals are all carnivore. A drastic preying competitions occur in every single second averagely. Varnary are very competitive predator. Although they are blind, but they have a very sensitive excellent ability to prey, that is echolocation. They can recognize the shape, size, and distance of such object by transmitting the sound wave and bounce back. Nasal air sacs, the blowholes, the larynx, the lungs, and the melon are the major organs that generate the sound wave, and the frequency of sound emissions is 180 Hz.
Due to the lack of sunlight in the Nanus, high pressure in the ocean, forming a dark, low temperature and high pressure environment, since photosynthesis is not possible, there are no photosynthesis plants, no herbivores, only cool and carnivorous animals. Therefore, Varnary mainly feeds on other living things in the ocean. Varnary's teeth are long and the roots are very short. The length of the corn is much longer than the root. This structure causes the Varnary to fall off easily when it bites the food. Varnary's teeth are only attached to the soft tissue, so the Varnary cannot chew food, can only directly tear the food to swallow. Because Varnary teeth are easily to fall off, Varnary generally has 5 to 6 rows of teeth at the same time. When a tooth on the outer layer is detached, the inner row of teeth will immediately move forward to complement the position of the vacancy that replaces the detached tooth. Fiber is the subcutaneous tissue distributed in the body of Varnary, rich in lipids and collagen fibers. The tendons and ligaments of the fan-like network structures are closely linked to the muscles and bones. The thickness is about 30 centimeters. The factor that moderately turns heat in water is determined by the ratio of lipid to water in the bladder. The higher the lipid ratio, the stronger the ability to keep warm. The biggest difference between bladder and the other adipose tissue is its high thickness, which acts as an effective thermal insulator to assist the animal in regulation body temperature, allowing body to maintain body temperature between 36.5 and 37 degrees, even in low temperature environments. Blubber has a good warmth. Blubber is not compressed as the water pressure increases. In diving, the blood vessels in the blubber will slow the flow of blood, which will increase the thermal insulation of the blubber. In addition to storing energy, blubber can also provide Venari with the flow state of swimming and maintaining the body's streamlined shape. In addition, Venari plays an important role in the ocean. Venari discharges a large amount of liquid manure, which is essentially flocculent, consisting of loose aggregates of particles, fluffy or thin. Feces may contain undigested hard objects. The feces may be discharged underwater, but will float to the surface until it disintegrates. Release of nitrogen and iron ions into marine ecosystems. This nutrition can accelerate the growth of plankton and further feed the fish in the ocean.
So continuing on from the introduction, the physiological system that we have chosen to speak about is the respiratory system. The Venari is an aquatic animal that lives in the first 2 kilometers of the base water level. As the dark world has an Earth-like atmosphere, meaning it has similar amounts of nitrogen, oxygen and carbon dioxide as Earth, there is a good amount of oxygen available in the water for the Venari to survive on. So we will start by stating that it has a closed circulatory system, meaning blood stays in the vessels in the body and doesn't move into any other cavities. It has a 2-chambered heart that has 1 atrium and 1 ventricle, and unfortunately my mouse isn't working today, so I can't kind of point to what I'm talking about, so I'm just going to have to explain it. So deoxygenated blood moves from the right hand side into the atrium, then moves into the ventricle where the muscles are a lot bigger there, and that will pump the deoxygenated blood, out into the capillaries and towards the gills, where the gills are the site of blood oxygenation. So gills are very thin in terms of the amount of distance oxygen needs to travel to reach the blood. This is efficient because that means that blood moves fast to the rest of the body and doesn't take too long to oxygenate. After the blood has made 1 full circuit around the body, it then travels back to the heart as deoxygenated blood and the whole cycle starts again. So, as I've said, the Venari has adapted gills that allow it to breathe. Gills are made of very thin tissue filaments that are highly branched and folded, and are very efficient because they increase surface area to maximize gas exchange. Each filament is divided into lamellae. Lamellae help to increase efficiency by increasing the surface area of gills. Lamellae are also very thin, so the oxygen can easily be diffused into the blood from the water. So I'm going to have to try and explain this diagram because I don't have a mouse. So basically in the top left-hand corner, oxygen enters, we're going to say that this is a Venari. Oxygen enters into the Venari's mouth and will leave through the gill slits where the water will pass over deoxygenated blood, and then because the oxygen is so high the water is high in oxygen, the oxygen will move from the water into the blood. So the second one, you can sort of say that on top of all of these gill filaments there's the lamellae, and then if we move into the top right hand corner, that's kind of a close-up of the lamellae. So water moves from the right hand side to the left hand side, and blood will move from the left hand side to the right hand side. So this is a countercurrent flow because they're moving in opposite directions, and I'll talk about that a bit later as well. So then you can see sort of at the bottom right hand corner here, I know it has like a partial pressure of oxygen, but I'm going to talk about that a bit later. So instead, we're just going to say that that is the amount of molecules of oxygen. So if this top blue line will say that there's 150 molecules of oxygen in water, and then if we look at the bottom line, which is the blood, we'll say there's 140 molecules of oxygen in the blood. So this just means that diffusion will occur because diffusion is the movement of a molecule from an area of high concentration to low concentration. So this means that the oxygen will always move from water into the blood because the blood always has less oxygen available as compared to the water. So this is a diagram of countercurrent flow. So the top one is concurrent flow, which the Venari doesn't have because it's just they will get to a point where there will be equilibrium between the blood and the water, and that isn't efficient to the animal at all. It just means that there will no longer be any movement of oxygen into the blood, so it's just not as efficient as countercurrent flow, where there was always a difference between the two, which means there was always going to be movement of oxygen from water into the blood. It's like you can see in the countercurrent flow, at the very start, the amount of molecules in the water is 40, whereas the amount of molecules of oxygen in the blood is 30, so the oxygen will always move from the water into the blood. Whereas in concurrent flow, you can see towards the end, the the amount of oxygen in both water and blood is 75 molecules. So they're equal, which means there is no longer any movement and it's just not efficient to the animal at all. Okay, so the Venari is an obligate ram ventilator, meaning that it swims around with its mouth open, which pushes water out of the gill slits, and as this happens, oxygen is passed into the blood. This breathing, however, requires constant movement, so the Venari is always moving through the water. Gas exchange occurs over the gills, where oxygen is passed, as I was saying before. This is called diffusion, where a molecule is passed from an area of high concentration to low concentration, and then this process is further maximised by countercurrent flow. So now that we've spoken about gas exchange, I can move on to pressure. So blood pressure cannot be too high, as this will destroy the very thin gills. However, they also need to be able to pump oxygenated blood around the rest of the body, so they need to kind of create a fine balance. As a Venari is an aquatic animal, it receives much less oxygen from its surroundings than a land mammal would. This is because water is much more viscous and oxygen is a lot less soluble in water. So the atmosphere of air is 760 millimeters of mercury, which is made up of like a large percent of nitrogen and then smaller percentages of oxygen and carbon dioxide. So there is much less oxygen available in water than air. However, the partial pressure of oxygen in water is the same as it is in the air. So partial pressure is the amount of pressure exerted by one particular molecule compared to other molecules in the same environment. So this means that although there is less oxygen available in water, there is also less CO2 and other molecules available compared to air too. So when oxygen in water is the same as the air, the water is said to be saturated. If water falls below 25% saturation, there is said to be an inadequate amount of oxygen available and the Venari may suffocate. Partial pressure is important because it dictates the rate of diffusion from water to blood through the gills. So partial pressure is directly proportional to diffusion. So as I was talking about before when I was explaining the molecules, and I said I'd talk about partial pressure a bit later, partial pressure is directly proportional to diffusion. So in those diagrams where there was like a larger amount of oxygen available in water than blood, so the partial pressure was like 40 in water and the partial pressure was 30 in blood, that means that the partial pressure always moves from high concentration to low concentration, just like diffusion. So if the partial pressure was 40, it would always move down the gradient into the blood, which is 30. So you can see sort of like in this diagram, partial pressure, so down the bottom there's a mixture of all three different gases. So we'll say one's oxygen, one's nitrogen, one's carbon dioxide. So there's a mixture of all of them, and partial pressure is just the amount of pressure exerted by one particular gas. And most importantly, we're talking about oxygen. So the amount of partial pressure oxygen exerts and how it maximizes gas exchange, because there's always a higher partial pressure in the water than there is in the blood. So now that we've completed that, I can move on to acknowledgements. Doris and Saya completed the introduction describing the world and the Venari. Leah and I completed the respiratory system, linking it back to the Venari's aquatic environment. And Tamika completed the photoshopping of the Venari. And then that's our references. Thank you for watching.